Why in the world do we keep calling literally the worst people on the planet powerful? And nobody questions it. We say it so casually. The people at the top of this weird pyramid scheme, the ones with the money and the platform and the private jets and the yachts and the ability to move markets. If I want to make it painfully concrete, I can point at people like Trump or Epstein or Netanyahu, certain CEOs or influencers, certain men who walk into a room and suck out the oxygen from it, and everyone mistakes that for charisma. And we all call them powerful. But I don't anymore, because deep down I know, and I think we all know, that is not what power is supposed to feel like. Welcome back to the Human OS, where we upgrade the internal operating system running your life. The patterns, the loops, the beliefs, reactions, identities you thought were just your personality. We're upgrading them. I'm Story, a singer, speaker, filmmaker, and someone who has spent a lot of time thinking about power. Not the fake, shiny version, the real thing. And if I had to say the whole episode in one sentence, it's this: real power generates. It does not extract. And a lot of what we've been taught to call power is actually fear, domination, or dependence, just with better branding. We all have our own relationship with power. Some people chase it in all the external places: money, status, fame, hierarchy, control. Some people reject it entirely because they think it's evil or arrogant and they want nothing to do with it. And some people assume that it was never made for them, that it belongs to those people, the rich, the men, the white people, the connected people, the beautiful people, the people whose dads own things, the people born in name brands, not hand-me-downs from Walmart. And so they build an identity around not having it or hating it or trying to prove that they don't need it. And I've definitely done all three of those things, but especially with money. It's only been recently that I stopped feeling guilty saying I wanted financial freedom. For a long time, I was basically living on the poverty line because I thought that made me righteous. I didn't want to be spoiled, pretentious, exploitative, or all-consuming. I wanted to be a good person. And somewhere along the way, I'd absorbed the idea that good people were poor and bad people were rich. And not exclusively, but in general. I grew up in a home where the message was basically, people with money are scamming you to get more money. The world was built for them, and they do not care about us. And maybe there are partial truths in there. Then I was also trafficked by someone who said he loved me while literally profiting off me. And so money, power, love, exploitation, all of that got fused together. And when those things get fused together, of course, power starts to feel dirty, dangerous, corrupt. And of course, part of you wants to reject the whole thing before it can reject you. In further healing, I realized money is just a tool, morally agnostic. It can be used for good, bad, or all the gray in between. But it's often hoarded to signify power, freedom, and status. And all of those reactions come from the same place. We've attached the word power to something that doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense. And I know this because I used to say it too. I used to say, he had power over me. And on paper, yeah, it made sense. Because my first boyfriend, who was 16 years older than me and lied about his age and groomed me and trafficked me and promised me all of my dreams and read people like a machine and had already trafficked dozens of women before me, he seemed powerful. He was more experienced, a music producer, he was connected and seemingly confident, very convincing, and he knew how to take just enough truth and mix it in with a lie so you'd swallow the whole pill. And because as a young woman, 19 years old, my brain only understood people like me, or at least people who were human in the way that I understood humanity. And so I was wildly unprepared for someone whose entire psychology was built around manipulation and extraction. My brain knew how to think like me, and he was nothing like me. And the thing people often don't understand about grooming and coercion is that it usually doesn't happen all at once. It's not normally what you see in the movies or TV, someone chained to a radiator, dragged into a van by a stranger. And don't get me wrong, that does happen, tragically. But it's a much smaller percentage of trafficking stories than people think. More often, it's subtle, and by somebody that we know and love. A shift here, a comment there, a little confusion or shame, a moment that made me really question myself instead of him. And over time, my world became smaller. He controlled my environment, then my time, then my choices. And maybe the biggest one, he heavily influenced how I saw myself. And that little voice, the one at the back of your mind, the one whispering encouragement or disgust, started to sound more and more like him. And that abuse was what I previously called power. But even inside of that abuse, something in me pushed back at times. I'd ask a question, I'd challenge him, argue his narratives, which is why every so often I'd get kicked out of me for not obeying him. My executive function was shot, my body was in constant fight or flight, and my ability to think critically was deeply compromised. But my instinct, that was still alive. And I knew something felt off. My mother knew something felt off. My family knew. They just didn't know what. And not just bad, but parasitic. He took my energy, my time, my body, my money, my choices. He just took and took and took, and no matter how much he extracted, it never filled him. There was no moment where he was like, yeah, I'm good. I'm satisfied. I'm at peace. No moment where he had enough. Honestly, it was endless because there was no container for anything to flourish. And so he kept taking until I was a shell of a human trying to survive something I didn't even have language for yet. I didn't know what the hell was happening to me. And here's what took me years to understand. That was not power. That was a lack, fear, scarcity, desperation dressed up as control. That was a man who believed that power could be taken or stolen from another human being because he did not have it within himself or he couldn't find it. He believed that power was a finite resource, something that had to be stolen and extracted and proven. He wasn't powerful. He was terrified. Skilled? Yes. Dangerous? Yes. Sick? But not powerful. He was a weak man trying to feel strong by stealing from someone else who had less experience. Not weak, not vulnerable. Those words often get used for survivors all of the time, and I'm sure as hell a frickin' firecracker, and there is nothing fragile about me. And that distinction matters because if we keep calling extraction power, we will keep worshiping the wrong thing. So I started asking myself, what is power actually? And the best way I can describe it now is this. It's like electricity. Real power doesn't extract, it generates. If you plug something into a real source of power, it turns on, not off. It illuminates, activates, creates energy and life and movement. The experience I was living with my trafficker felt like I was living inside something that kept unplugging me, draining me, dimming me, shrinking me, when the best use of my power and my light, and his, if he'd had any, would have been to let me keep shining that light. But instead, he needed me to believe I was insufficient so that I could not see the multitude of things he himself lacked and the multitude of things I possessed. And yes, of course, that had impact on my life. It had influence, it had consequences, but we can't keep lumping every type of influence into one basket and call it power. They're not the same. They are not equal. And because I've felt what power feels like in my body, I sure as hell know that it does not come from scarcity or lack. And the wild part is, currently, our general worldly definition of power is built on that very foundation. We look at people who dominate and control, who extract, who shrink others, and we give them a title they didn't earn, that they don't deserve. And when we do that, we don't just accidentally elevate them, we shrink everyone else. We shrink survivors, we shrink ourselves, we shrink people who already feel powerless. We shrink anyone who has been convinced that power lives outside of them. We start to believe that power is something we don't have, something we shouldn't want, something we shouldn't be. And that belief keeps people stuck. Because I actually think every single one of us was meant to be powerful. That being powerful is our natural state. And I'll say that again. Being powerful is our nature. Power just looks different than what we've been taught. And so I'm on a mission to change our very definition of power. I have stopped using that word the same way, and I encourage everyone to do the same, because language shapes how we not only see the world, but how we create our reality. And if we keep calling extraction and exploitation power, we will keep building a world that worships dead ends and shrinking the very people who intrinsically have the power to change the world. You. We create apathy, debilitation, disconnection. People start to believe they cannot do anything about the so-called powers that be, which is exactly what those systems want. Because if the public feels too small, too tired, too powerless to respond, the pillaging can continue uninterrupted. And that is how these systems survive. Not just by taking, but by convincing the rest of us not to respond because we believe, whether consciously or unconsciously, that we are powerless. So now I ask a different question. What are we actually looking at when we call something power? And once you see it, you can't unsee it, and things start to shift. And when you look at it across culture, it starts to feel uncomfortable very fast. Now let's look at who we've been calling powerful. The people at the top of this weird pyramid scheme, the ones with the money and the platform and the private jets and the yachts and the ability to move markets. If I want to make it painfully concrete, I can point at people like Trump or Epstein or Netanyahu, certain CEOs or influencers, certain men who walk into a room and suck out the oxygen from it, and everyone mistakes that for charisma. And we all call them powerful. But I don't anymore, because everything we're pointing at depends on external conditions. If money is the condition that gives you power, and you lose all of it in the stock market tomorrow, what's left? If it's image and you're canceled, does your power still stand? If you're a president and go to jail for 20 years, has your power been stripped? And if your strength depends on youth, beauty, money, office, PR, fear, access, silence, applause, and those things go, what's left? Take those conditions away, and much of what we consider power collapses. And if what you call power only exists when the machine around it keeps feeding it, then is it true power? I think we would call that conditional control. And the thing about control is it needs constant maintenance. You have to protect it, perform it, defend it, reassert it, feed it. It relies on external validation. Fuck, is that exhausting? Honestly, I don't think anyone truly wants to live that way. They just don't know of a better way, so they keep climbing because they're afraid of falling. Because a lot of what we call power is just control and domination at scale. And again, that's just fragility. And then people love to justify all of this with the animal kingdom, with what's natural. And every time someone uses nature to justify domination, I'm like, shut up. Nature did not invent hedge funds, PR teams, private equity, or gendered power games. Especially the manosphere loves to talk about the top of the food chain. They like to compare themselves to lions, sharks, predators, but animals don't behave like we do. Firstly, we are one species, not lions versus rabbits. Humans are complex, yes, but we are still far more alike than we'd like to think. And here's another thing. A shark does not consume endlessly to feel important. It doesn't try to eat up all the fish and save a pile for later. A satiated shark, generally speaking, is not swimming around trying to dominate the ocean to make sure everybody knows it matters. And it rarely attacks unless it feels threatened, unless it feels unsafe. And I'll get to safety and power and a link between the two a bit later in the episode. But the shark acts within its needs. We, on the other hand, often behave more like parasites. A parasite survives by attaching to a host. It feeds, it takes, it grows by consuming the very thing that sustains it. And the more it takes, the weaker the host becomes. And eventually, it goes far enough that it destroys the very thing it depends on. It's like us and the environmental crisis. We're killing the very planet that we need to exist. That is not power. That is an illness. And cancer is similar. Cancer cells think they're proliferating, spreading, multiplying. And if you looked only at growth, only at numbers, only at expansion without context, you might think, wow, look at how powerful that is. And don't get me started on how we literally operate with this endless growth mindset where shareholders do not care about the impact of their expansion, just that expansion and numbers are increasing. So seriously, let's call it what it is. A destructive force inside a living system that is no longer operating in service of the whole. Cancer thinks it's winning because it's growing, but really it's killing the very body it lives in. And in doing that, it destroys itself too. That's self-destruction with a lot of momentum and stupidity. And that's how I see domination. That is how I see abuse, exploitative leadership, predatory power structures, patriarchal systems at their most distorted. Not as power, but as disease in the system. What do we do with illnesses? We flush them out. We eliminate them. We are basically teaching people, if you were loud, ruthless, controlling, extractive, congratulations, you must be powerful. What a stupid lesson. What a tragic lesson. What a dangerous lesson. Because then people start chasing the wrong thing. They start aspiring to domination or fearing domination or checking out completely because they assume power belongs to whoever is willing to be the least human. And then we wonder why people feel apathetic. We've disconnected them from their own source, and we've crowned a domination in its place. And I think this is one of the ways patriarchy functions. Not just men at the top and women and marginalized people at the bottom. That's way too simplistic. You are taught that power is scarce when literally energy is all around us. That some people have it and some don't. That to get it, someone must lose. That to feel strong, something else must be weakened. I don't call that nature. I call that distortion. Because in a healthy system, power stabilizes, it protects, it nourishes, it creates conditions for life and death. It balances. In the body, the true power is not the cancer. It's the healthy tissue. It's the white blood cells. It's the immune response, the parts working in service of the whole. That is power. It doesn't dominate the body, it sustains it. And I think that is such an important reframe because once you stop confusing destruction with power, you start seeing a lot of people very differently. I cannot tell you how many powerful people I've met. Some of them even my idols at one point. People who seemingly had everything I was aspiring to: fame, fortune, access, influence. And then I met them. And underneath all that performance and mask, most of them were miserable, sad, flimsy, completely disconnected from themselves. No real sense of who they were without the costume. And I realized then and there that I had been admiring packaging, branding. They are dependent on conditions, on image, on everyone around them continuing to believe the performance. And if the performance drops, so do they. But real power cannot be dependent on external conditions alone. So then the question becomes, if that's not power, then what is? There has to be something that does not collapse when the market crashes, or the title disappears, or the relationship ends, or the audience turns. Something that does not need to take from anyone else to exist. Something self-generating. So let's define it and redefine power. Real power isn't rented. It's owned. It's not loud or a performance or control. It does not disappear the second conditions can change, and it definitely doesn't need validation to exist. So what is it? It's internal. It's self-generating. Real power is self-mastery. And I don't mean perfection, not some Zen robot state where you never get triggered again. It's not being above your humanity. I'm talking about your ability to observe clearly, choose consciously instead of reacting, hold your center and stay connected to yourself, influence without needing to diminish, lead without needing to dominate. That, to me, is power, and it is trainable. It's not easy. It's hard, and it needs constant practice. And there's no such thing as perfectly unwavering internal power, but it is trainable. And lucky for us, it's free, which is maybe why it's not exactly the place people are directing you. Because once you're connected to your own power, you become much harder to manipulate, much harder to sell to, and much harder to keep running on a hamster wheel that was never built for your freedom, for your success. The more you practice it, the stronger it gets. Like a fire, like a muscle, like a circuit reconnecting to source. You could be sent to prison for 20 years and still have your power. You could be trafficked for a decade and still find that inner spark. You could lose the title, the money, the body, the applause, and still have access to the deepest parts of yourself. Because real power is not what's happening around you. It's what remains alive within you. Now, when I left my trafficker, I had none of that. I was not grounded. I wasn't clear or stable. I did not trust myself to make any decisions. And I was reacting constantly, living in fight or flight mode without even realizing it. And I thought that I was okay. And honestly, I think that's how most people are living. We're reacting and not realizing it in a world that rewards reaction. I mean, even the algorithm feeds it. It rewards outrage, panic, definitely polarization. It rewards instant emotional destabilization because that keeps you scrolling and clicking and hooked and buying. Have you ever noticed how little nuance exists on social media? So not only are many of us already wounded and dysregulated or disconnected from self, we are living inside systems that monetize that exact state. And that's worth noticing, because real power is the ability to choose instead of only react. And there's a difference between feeling emotion and being sensitive to changes in your inner and outer environment, which I think is very powerful, and reacting to emotion without thought, and being fragile and reactive to that environment, which I think often leads to fear, outrage, aggression, or domination. But the thing is, you cannot access your power without safety. Because when your nervous system is in survival mode, you cannot always choose well. You simply must react. And again, I'll reiterate that that is not weakness. That is just biology. But what it means is that most people have not lost their power. They have just lost the conditions to access it. And that is a very different problem. And honestly, it's a much more hopeful one, right? Because if the problem is not, I am powerless, but rather, I have been disconnected from my source, then the work just becomes reconnection. It's not hopeless. It's very, very possible and realistic. You don't need to posture or dominate or become more impressive or rich or someone that you're not. You don't need to hustle harder or become feared. It's just reconnecting to who you really are. To self-awareness, to self-trust, to enough safety in the body that choices become possible again. I've started developing a framework called the 5 Laws of Real Power, and it starts there with self-awareness. Power is not the thing you perform, it is the thing you embody. And embodied power stabilizes and creates expansively. And it allows other people to expand too. And that's a huge tell, by the way. I think love and real power share a common trait. Neither one is diminished by being shared. So think about having a child and loving that child so, so much. And then having your second child. Do you love the first child less? No, because real love is not finite. It's expansive. And I think real power works the same way. When you feel deeply empowered within yourself, you don't need to go out into the world dominating people just to prove that you're powerful. I know this because I felt it. I've had glimmers of what it means to be in my power after years and years of self-loathing and shame. You don't need to make someone else smaller to feel big. You're happy to see people doing well because it does not diminish your life. And you don't need to steal light to know that you shine. Your power naturally creates more power. It makes people feel safer, seen, clearer, more themselves. Because once you are connected to your own power, you begin to recognize the godlike spark in other people too. And instead of needing to dominate it, you actually want to help it come alive. That to me is one of the clearest signs of real power. It doesn't panic in the presence of someone else's light. It knows that there is enough light to go all around. A candle can light a million other candles and still keep its flame. That is power. So here's today's Human OS upgrade. Stop using the word power so lazily. Seriously, I'm saying we need a full rebrand. We need the dictionary to change some definitions. So over the next few days, notice, who are you calling powerful and why? Notice whether what you are admiring is actually power or just fear, wealth, domination. And try to find a more accurate word. Is it manipulation, exploitation, abuse? Let's use those words instead so we can give these people their true titles. Because words matter. Language trains perception. And if you keep calling extractive people powerful, eventually your body starts to believe power is dangerous, external, scarce, and not for you. And that is a horrible operating system. So instead, start asking, does this so-called power generate or extract? Does it expand life or shrink it? Does it create clarity or dependence? Does it stabilize the room or make everyone smaller inside it? And then bring it closer. Where in your own life are you still confusing control with power? Where are you trying to control perception instead of telling the truth? Where are you trying to dominate a conversation because you don't feel safe enough to maybe just not be right. And that's okay. Where are you looking for validation instead of generating self-trust? Where are you still believing that something outside of you defines your value? That's the real work. Because the question isn't, how do I gain more power? The question becomes, where am I giving mine away? Where have I outsourced it or forgotten who I am? Where have I confused aggression with strength? Where have I accidentally crowned domination because I didn't yet know what real power felt like? Because no one can take your power in the deepest sense, but they can absolutely convince you it was never yours. And that belief is what keeps the whole parasitic system running. So if power isn't something you gain, maybe it's simply something you remember. Maybe it's something you stop worshiping outside of you. Maybe it's something you practice every time you pause before reacting, every time you tell the truth, every time you lovingly hold a boundary, every time you refuse to shrink someone to feel tall. That is power, not the fake glittery version or the scary destructive version, the real thing, the kind that shines so damn bright because it is connected to the source. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of The Human OS. My name is Story with 2 R's. If this landed for you, please share it with someone who is either chasing power or who may have forgotten they already have it. Like, subscribe, help me keep this channel going so I can keep giving you these nuggets and keep building this conversation with you. Big love, my friends, and I'll see you in the next episode.